to the fifth annual and first virtual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. I'm Jen McEwen, Director of Cultural Affairs for the town of Hilton Head Island. Tonight's program, We the People, Mary Whyte in conversation with Holly Jackson, is presented in partnership between the nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center and ETB Lowcountry in Beaufort. It's also a featured event at Hilton Head Island's Crescendo Festival, which is a celebration of arts and culture on Hilton Head Island in collaboration with National Arts and Humanities Month. Attendees in our Zoom room are encouraged to post their questions in the chat to both Mary and Holly. You'll also find links in the chat to purchase Mary Whyte's books, including We the People, and to find out about upcoming events of the Literary Festival. We the People is both a book and a touring art exhibit honoring the lives and sacrifices of American veterans and features a series of stunning portraits of veterans from all 50 states. Tonight, we'll learn about the origins of this project, what it says about the nature and the promise of our democracy, and what it has come to mean to so many. Our guest tonight, Mary Whyte, is an American figurative artist known internationally for her watercolors of contemporary people. Her works are in private, corporate, and public collections nationwide and have been featured on CBS Sunday Morning, PBS, and NPR. In 2013, Mary was one of 10 artists worldwide to be invited to travel to China and exhibit her watercolors at the Nanning Art Museum. The author of 7 books, she is also the recipient of numerous awards, including the Portrait Society of America's Gold Medal, the Carolinas Freedom Foundation's Freedom Award, and the Elizabeth O'Neill Verner Award, which is South Carolina's highest honor in the arts. In 2019, Mary founded the Patriots Foundation as a means to honor and inspire veterans through the arts. Mary will be interviewed this evening by Holly Jackson, Director of Content and Operations at ETB Lowcountry in Beaufort, and the host of the Telly Award-winning interview series, By the River, now in its 3rd season. Mary and Holly, thank you both so much for joining us for what promises to be an inspiring conversation. Welcome, everyone, and enjoy.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm from South Carolina ETB, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity. I want to thank Jonathan and all those from the Pat Conroy Literary Center for thinking of me to do this interview. I consider it an honor, and I'm excited about it. Of course, we have a big night in store to talk with Miss Mary Whyte, and I want to tell you briefly, my first introduction to Mary Whyte was several years ago when my husband came home from a business trip in Charleston with the book in hand, Working South. And I looked through, it was a beautiful book, and I'm looking through and I start seeing people from my hometown of Bishopville, South Carolina. And we're an area that really isn't typically represented, especially in positive ways. And I was thrilled and pleasantly surprised to see that. And I could tell that she has a heart to include everyone. And that's certainly something that we see in this book, We the People. So we'll get right to the questions. And Mary, thank you so much for joining us. If you first would just start by telling us where this idea came about.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Holly. It's a great pleasure to be with you and all of you tonight. I've painted people all my life, and the exhibition that I did prior to this one is a series of paintings on people in the South, blue-collar workers in vanishing industries. It was called Working South. And when that exhibition was touring and nearing its close after 5 museums, I began thinking about what my next project might be. And that's when I thought, well, what if I did something even bigger? What if I went to all 50 states and did a portrait in each of the 50 states and made this all-encompassing portrait of America and as we really and truly are today. And so immediately I thought, well, how do I choose one American from each state, and what makes a person most American? And that answer was very obvious to me, that I believe our truest Americans are our veterans. And so that was how the idea for this project was born. And it took me 7 years to do these paintings. I went to all 50 states and visited with each of the veterans that I painted.
When you were entering this project, did you have any idea what you were getting into as far as that 7 years and all the phone calls and all the research you would have to do?
Well, I probably, if anyone had told me just how long it would take me and how many phone calls it was going to take to do this project, I might have thought twice. But it was really, I have to say, it was the adventure of a lifetime. You know, I got to see all 50 states. I met some extraordinary people, and I'm just so glad that I got to do this.
You know, you interview everyone from someone who is homeless to someone, to an astronaut. I'm wondering about how those people accepted you and your idea. Were they reluctant at all, anybody, to get involved in this?
Well, you know, I found that overall the veterans that I spoke to were very modest, and any reluctance was really, they would say, well, this is a big honor. I mean, I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything of importance. You should honor someone who did something courageous. And that was really the point of this whole project, was I wanted to paint everyday average men and women who raised their hands and said, I will serve my country. The ones that did not get the big accolades or high-ranking positions, but the average everyday veteran who served and then quietly folded back into their families and communities.
Talk about the connection that you formed with these people that you came to meet along those 7 years.
Oh, I have to say it was amazing. I had hoped to meet some and learn about their professions, but I also made some really good friendships along the way, and I still keep in touch with several of the veterans. I hear from them, and we exchange emails, and I get to hear about their families and what they're doing now. So it was very rewarding for me to do this.
So whenever you, for instance, find, say, the truck driver, how do you actually go about making that connection? Do you know somebody who knows somebody? Just what is step one?
Well, actually, the very first step was I made a list of all the kinds of Americans I wanted to include in this project, everything from an astronaut all the way down to a homeless person. And then in between, people like a school teacher, a tattoo artist, a truck driver, a chef, a coal miner, a circus performer. And then I drew a big map of the United States and thought, well, obviously I'll probably get a coal miner in West Virginia. I can probably find my astronaut in Florida. And then from there, it was a lot of phone calls. It was actually a lot harder than I thought to find these veterans, because the veterans are really just about 1% of our population. So finding a truck driver is not too hard, but finding a truck driver who's also a veteran is much harder. And in the veteran that I painted, I thought, what if I could find a woman truck driver and veteran? So that's Sandra from Ohio. She's a Marine, and made her career after she left the Marines. She made her career driving a 50+ foot rig all across the country. And so just to find her, I probably made at least 25 phone calls to trucking companies. Do you have a woman veteran truck driver?
So would you say that she was probably your most challenging as far as making that connection?
Oh, no, there were ones way more challenging, like just to get to the astronaut, to get into NASA. I mean, that's to get into NASA. And then to get to my coal miners, that was really challenging. And then even to get to a Native American, because there was a lot of Native Americans that are in the military. And so it was difficult accessing the tribal leader, talking with someone, and then getting them to introduce me to one of their veterans.
I can imagine that for some of this experience probably has impacted their life greatly. Can you talk about that, share any stories and examples of that?
You know, several of them said to me that it changed their life, that this kind of recognition was something that they never really had. I mean, they served their country and then they came home. And the responses that I got from not only the veterans that I painted, but other veterans as well that came to the exhibition when it opened here in Charleston. I mean, these Marines, these big guys would come in and they would try and tell me what this meant to them to be painted, and they would start to weep. I mean, there were times I was so moved by these stories, people handing me pictures of their grandfather, you know, that was a veteran, or a badge that belonged to someone who was a veteran that they wanted me to have. There were times I was so moved, I had to walk away. I had to leave the building. It was so moving to me.
Did you have any of those emotions as you were on the job with these people? Because I imagine, you know, window washers and truck drivers, they're in the middle of their day to day. So, and you were too. You were at work. But whenever you think about what you're doing, and I imagine that those emotions have to come up during that time.
They do at the time, but my main focus at the time is getting the job done. And when I would be with the veterans, like a window washer or a chef, I mean, they're on the job, and they're sort of trailing them around with the sketchbook and camera, but trying to stay out of the way. Like the window washer, I got permission from the boss to trail him around. And at one point, the boss says, "Look, Mary, you're kind of getting in the way here." So I had to be really focused on getting the material that I needed, and then getting out of the way.
Very nice. Take us back to that exhibition where several of these people came to Charleston. I imagine for some that was a first time ever. What kind of experience was that like for them?
Yes, through the Patriot Art Foundation, we were able to raise the funds to bring in 30 of the 50 veterans and a guest to the opening. And so they came from all over the country, and we were able to put them up in a hotel, take them to a special concert, bring them to the exhibition where they could meet the public. And they all saw their painting for the first time that night. So for them, it was really moving, and for the public to see them, you know, walk in and see their paintings for the first time.
I can only imagine. Let's back up a little bit. Take us to your studio. So you've made the calls, you've been out there in the field, and you've made the sketches, you've taken the photos. Then what happens?
Well, people often ask me, do I work from photographs? And the answer is yes, but that's only one of 4 sources. I mean, I also work from life as much as I can. And I also work from memory and from imagination. And so, for instance, the painting of the astronaut, which is the biggest one, it's almost 10 feet across, it's a triptych, where I've painted Winston Scott on a spacewalk coming back in to the spaceship. Obviously, I wasn't there in person, and I could only imagine what it was like. And he later told me, he says, "Mary, you got it exactly right. You got my spacesuit right. You got the look on my face right. You got the positioning. You got the curve of the Earth just right on it." But that was just simply, I got a lot of books from the library, and you know, what does that look like in space? What would it look like to have this astronaut come back? So that's really from some of the resource material that I got at NASA, but other is just completely, I mean, what would it feel like to be an astronaut coming back to the spaceship?
Can we back way up and talk about where this all began? I mean, when did you first pick up the brush, and where was your inspiration?
You mean for being an artist, or for this?
Right, for being an artist.
You know, I think it's a question I get, and I'm sure all artists get, is when did you decide to be an artist? And it's not a decision that we make. It's at one point you discover you were an artist all along. And the decision you make is, am I going to do something about this? Am I going to do something with this amazing gift that I've been given? And so when I was in 8th grade. I was visiting a relative in New Jersey and doing a drawing of this old building, which was a bar and restaurant across the street. And she came out and she said, you know, Mary, I bet they would buy that. So she takes it across the street and she comes back and she puts $20 in my hand. I said, what? I mean, they pay you to do this? So that's when I decided, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an artist. You know, even if I have to live in a cardboard box, I'm going to be an artist.
That's really neat. Let's talk about the layout of the book. I don't know if people can see as I'm showing this, but it's a beautiful cover. Did you have any say-so in how the layout would be on the cover?
Well, I did. I had some, but this was produced by University of South Carolina Press, and their designer there, Pat Callahan, is fantastic. And she's actually done a couple books with my work. So it was really largely her design, my sort of vision, but really her design.
And then I love how in the beginning you kind of tell the story, much of what we've asked, but you have some of those pictures. I don't know if we can show these. The plan is to show some of these photos, and I'll just look for some guidance maybe in the chat box on that. They say it's up right now, so I'm just going to trust that people are seeing photos right now that were included in the book, and just phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. But what I want people to really see is towards the end of that slideshow, we actually see you in the studio, and we also see you out there at the homeless camp and talking to that man. So who did you have with you? Of course, there was someone who was taking the photos of you there. So who was along with you?
Well, I knew that I had to include a homeless veteran in this because we have so many homeless people in this country and so many homeless veterans in this country. So out in California, near Monterey, there's an initiative out there that helps homeless veterans get back on their feet. So I called them and then went out there and they told me about Dennis, who was at that time living up in the forest near Carmel. And I actually hired another homeless veteran who knew the way up into the forest. And so he led me in. And I carried my backpack and my sketchbook and camera and a bag of dog food because I was told that Dennis had a dog. And I figured that was my best entree, was to bring food as well.
Smart. Let's go into your teaching life. Tell us about that and why you do it, and just the whole part of, you know, being an inspiration and role model for someone else.
Well, gosh, you know, when you do something that gives you such pleasure and such joy, I mean, why wouldn't you want to share this with others as well? And it is really rewarding to be able to teach somebody something that will give them a sense of expression and discovery and great satisfaction in their life. So I've been teaching for, gosh, almost 50 years now. And I started teaching just right out of, in high school and then right out of college as well. And it's a great pleasure for me. And it also, by being a teacher, it forces you to be succinct in your thinking and what you know, how to create and craft a sound painting. So certainly by teaching, it's made me a better painter as well.
Where are all these paintings right now? Is there an exhibition right now?
There is. The paintings are now touring. They'll be touring for a couple of years. And right now they're in Columbus, Ohio at the National Veterans Memorial and Museum there in Columbus. And they will be there until and through March, largely. And then from there, they're going to Huntsville, Alabama, and then up to the National Museum of the Marines just outside Washington for 8 months there.
Okay. I believe people right now are seeing the boxer photo, and I think there's a question about, you know, what's the story behind that one? Can you share?
Well, you know, these women that come out of the military, they are so fit. I mean,
right.
And so I thought, I've got to include somebody like that. And so I thought, oh, maybe a boxing trainer. And at that time, I was in near Omaha, Nebraska. I was renting an apartment in the Midwest so I could get to all the Midwestern states. And so I actually got into a boxing studio, and I found Tasia, and she was a boxing instructor there, and a Navy veteran. And so I got her to pose for me with this big guy. And in real life, the background, the wall was just white, and she was wearing something a little bit different, and he was wearing something different. But I wanted to give it this fiery red background, so you could feel the heat, and you could feel, the sweat on her. And at one point, when she wasn't quite sweaty enough, I went into the bathroom, got a paper towel, came back and squeezed it overhead so she was nice and wet again. So I could the images I needed. And then I take all that back to my studio and put it together.
Very nice. Before I ask this next question, I want to tell those who are watching that you have the opportunity to ask your own questions, and those will be sent to me and I will ask them. So please do send some questions if you have them for Mary Whyte. Okay, so tell us what happens after all the tours, then what happens to the photos?
Well, my goal is that we can keep these paintings all together and on view to the American public. And so that's what that's the dream, and that's what we're working towards right now.
Sounds very good. What kind of response have you gotten from veteran readers? Those not who are involved in this, but those who have come across the book or been gifted the book in some way. What kind of responses have you gotten from them?
Some amazing responses. I mean, just this week, responses from some veterans who saw the show in Columbus, Ohio. Just that they're very proud that it's up, that they feel represented, and several of them have said that they want to help in some way move the foundation forward and more exposure for this exhibition and book, so that other veterans can feel honored and appreciated as well.
Right. Tell us how this project compares to that of Working South.
Well, this was much bigger in scope. This was, 50 states, and I did this largely in secret. I didn't tell anybody that I was doing this, and I traveled largely on my own to reach the 50 states. And of course, it took a lot longer than I thought, but I got there. And it just was so much bigger, and the people that I got to meet and speak with, like President George Bush along the way, and just some high-ranking military people that were very encouraging to me to do this.
What was the purpose behind doing this in secret?
Well, a couple things. One was I wasn't sure, but I wanted to be absolutely sure I could do this. So I didn't want to announce something until I was pretty well sure. And also, I wanted the idea to be fresh when it came out. So sort of a big surprise when this thing came out. So I had to keep it very carefully guarded and under wraps for that reason.
That's pretty tough to keep a 7-year secret. That's impressive.
Yeah.
All right, we have a lot of questions coming in, and so I'm excited about that. I always love to hear what people have to ask. Larry Gale is the first one, wants to know, have watercolors always been your medium of choice?
I would have to say yes. I've always loved watercolor. I started painting in watercolor when I was 16. I think about when I was 16. However, when I went to art school, it was not taught in art school. It was watercolor's always been viewed as a lesser, lightweight medium. And so I really had to figure it out on my own by going to museums, looking at art books, copying other artists, emulating their technique, and then finally getting the hang of it that way.
Okay. Our next question is from Diane Cook. She asked, with such a large format, what materials, for example, paper, do you use? And wants to know if you are a Charleston resident.
Okay. As far as the paper that I use, it's Arches, and it's what we call cold press, which means it has a little bit of texture to it. The sheets that I buy are really quite large, because most of these paintings are pretty big. So it has to be a heavier weight so that it doesn't buckle too much.
Okay.
Being a Charlestonian, I do live here in Charleston, and my studio is where I work is downtown Charleston.
Jill Johnson, we talked a little bit about the connection that you made with these folks, but she wants to know, have you stayed in communication with any of the veterans represented in the book?
The answer is yes. I've stayed in touch with several of them, and through emails, and I spoke with one on the phone. My veteran Jody from Maine, just spoke with her recently on the phone, and I've just stayed in touch with them. And gosh, it's really been fun hearing about their lives since then.
That's great. And Jane Adams says, I saw Working South at the Telfair in Savannah. Will the show be there? And what is the best way to get the book in order to help veterans?
Well, right now the show is not going to be going to the Telfair. I guess the closest would be the Huntsville Museum in Huntsville, Alabama, to there. And as far as getting the book can be certainly purchased through Amazon or any online bookseller. We also sell autographed books through our website at marywhyte.com.
Perfect. Next is from Sherry and Ray Stewart. And first want to say, hi, Ray. What was your greatest challenge in this project?
Oh, I would say the greatest challenge would be reaching some of the veterans that I wanted to get to. And probably the one that was the most challenging was the homeless veteran. Getting to a homeless veteran, finding a veteran, and then doing a painting. I probably did that painting over at least 3 times. I wanted to get the feeling of what it feels like to have PTSD, to be homeless, and yet still be honorable to the subject as well.
Did anyone deny participation whenever you tried to do this?
I think 1 or 2 did. They didn't quite understand it, what I was doing, and that's okay. The only requirements I had was that they were honorably discharged in this as a service person, and otherwise people were very curious about it and very excited about it to be part of this.
And did you have to make sure that they were in on the secret keeping?
Well, we tried. I mean, some of them we had to hold back. Please don't put this on Facebook yet.
Right.
Please keep it under your hat yet. That's also why they didn't see their paintings until the opening, because I knew if I sent them their images,
they'd be everywhere.
They'd be all over. So after the show went up, we gave every one of the veterans a framed print, of their painting and one of the signed books as well. And as well as bringing them to the opening.
Right, that's great. Okay, our next question is from Rebecca, and she asked, are there any models or subjects that you met during the development that were not included in the series and that you still plan to paint?
That's a great question. Yes, there were some that I met that I didn't include for one reason or another, that I would love to just go back and paint. And then there were others that I met along the way that just, I thought, wow, what an interesting profession if I could, get back and paint something like that. I mean, obviously I painted 50 individuals, and there were, just as many others hundreds of others that I could have painted that all had really interesting life stories and circumstances.
All right. And Laurie Griffin asks, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a couple things right now, and of course, this project, getting it up and on the road has taken much more time than I thought it would. I'm also at the foundation, the Patriot Art Foundation, and we're working with a wonderful board there on establishing online classes for veterans. So in between that, I am painting as much as I can in the studio as well.
All right. Susan asks, or says first, that I saw the exhibit in Charleston, absolutely magnificent work. I also bought the book and I still can't pick one favorite. Do you have a favorite? I do get asked that question quite frequently, and it's
I don't think I could possibly pick a favorite because some of the paintings I'm particularly proud of because it was something I had never painted before, like a certain type of lighting situation or on a, like the lobsterman, being on the lobster boat, and I wanted to show it with this huge wave, crashing over, a rogue wave coming over. So that's a favorite because I felt I got that feeling, and then others are favorites simply because of the person that I painted. That I'm especially have gotten to know them and feel especially a wonderful sense of friendship with that person.
Tell us how you picked the one from South Carolina and a little bit about it.
The South Carolina one was the very last one I did. That's closest to home. I can save that to last. And I realized when I was coming towards the end of this that I had not addressed or included single mothers in this series, and that we have, so many single mothers, and particularly the ones that really amaze me are single mothers that are in the military. I just don't know how they do that. They can manage both the family and their commitment to our country at the same time. So that is a young woman who is a single mom shown with her two sons.
Okay. Rebecca again asked, can you tell us about the painting behind you and who is the woman in the white hat?
Well, that happens to be a self-portrait that I did there. That I did recently during this pandemic because it's, being an artist right now, we work in solitude most of the time anyway. So it's being quarantined, being a pandemic isn't that difficult. So I thought, well, I might as well do a self-portrait. I'm here, the mirror's here. So this is, I'm wearing a newspaper hat folded into sort of cone shape. And if you look closely, you can see that it has some news on it about the pandemic. And so that is really done just by looking right into the mirror, with the mirror set up right here, and my painting just right next to it. So just looking right into the mirror that way.
Wow. Was that a first for you?
Oh, no, I think that's my 6th self-portrait.
Okay.
The painting on this, over my shoulder on this side, this is Marty, and he's from Charleston. Marty's actually a marine biologist, but I saw him one day in the park, and he has amazing dreadlocks and tattoos, and so I got Marty to pose for me for this painting.
That's great. We have so many more questions coming in, so I'm going to make sure I get to these. From Richard Brown wants to know, who were your primary artistic influences?
Oh, that's a great question. I would have to say that probably the 3 artists that have influenced my work the most would be Winslow Homer, John Singer Sargent, and Andrew Whyte. All 3 for their watercolors and their technique and the substance behind their paintings that always I find myself going back to them, going back and studying their work.
Okay. Daniel Abernathy wants to know, is there any update on a permanent home for the paintings?
Well, we're working on that, and that's a big project, and that's certainly my dream, is to have all of these paintings stay together and on view.
Mm-hmm. Debbie wants to know, what size paper is it that is in the exhibit?
Well, you can see the size of these 2 paintings behind me right here. This would be the smallest in the exhibit. A lot of the paintings are as much as 6 feet framed, and the largest one, which is the triptych of the astronaut, is actually 10 feet across.
Mm-hmm. So I was interested when you talked about the marine biologist and how you just saw him in the park. And does that kind of thing happen a lot? You see somebody and you think, I have to do a portrait on this person. And how does that initial conversation even begin?
Well, it's, I've often said I've never regretted one painting I've ever done, even if it was a total bomb in the making and I had to tear it up. But the ones I regretted are the ones I didn't do. And those are the ones where I saw someone and I was just too shy to go up and ask them if they would pose for me. And rarely I've ever had anyone say no. I mean, I just go up and I say, I'm Mary and I'm an artist. I'd like to do some sketches of you, maybe take some photos of you. And most people are like, me? You know, and I love that about it. So I see people just, and I think, well, there's someone I'd really like to paint. And so I just go ask them.
And you keep that contact, and I imagine they always see the final product, or?
Yes, and of course, models are always compensated. I always have them sign a permission form that gives me permission to paint them. And a lot of the times I will give them a print of the painting after it's done.
Very nice. Tell us about the frames. How do you go about choosing how to frame your art?
Well, the frame is an important part of the painting, and behind me you can see two. These are both handmade frames behind me. They're hand carved and hand gilded, and it's the real finishing component to any painting is the frame. And also the mats that I use they're wrapped linen mats, and everything in there is archival, so that there's nothing with acid like a newspaper print would have acid on it. This is all archival, acid-free materials behind, UV protected glass. So they're all very carefully framed.
I've been so interested in how authors and artists have used their time in the pandemic. And you mentioned the painting behind you. Have you branched out into just anything different? So many people have taken on new activities. Is there anything different that you've done because of this extra time?
I mean, other than painting?
Sure.
I would say I'm doing a lot more cooking.
Right.
A lot more reading as well, a lot more listening to music. And, the pandemic has made me focus more on my closer world. I mean, just walking in the neighborhood, it's just like, wow, this is so beautiful here in this neighborhood, just here. So I think any of our circumstances, when they force you to be in a different circumstance, it does require that we look differently and more carefully at our surroundings.
I speak with authors a lot and ask them about their circle of critics, people who they trust, who they can lean on, who will be honest and say, I don't like the way this is going. I don't think this is going to fly. Do you have any of those people?
Well, I guess my worst critic would just be me. I do tear up about 1 out of every 4 paintings, which often surprises my students.
Wow.
But, they didn't quite get the power that I wanted them to have, or I changed direction too much and it got overworked or muddied. So whenever that happens, I just say, okay, well, that's another one of my studies. And then I just continue on towards the finished product. So when I do tear it up, it always brings you closer. Every no brings you closer to a yes.
I like that. All right, Jane Adams wants to know, what might your next project be?
Well, of course, I love painting people. So I've got a couple ideas mulling around in my head. I don't want to say just yet what they are, but certainly painting people, particularly people that are more overlooked than others.
Mm-hmm. Henry Ramsey wants to know, what are you reading these days?
Oh, I'm reading several things. Next to my bed, I probably have 6 different books right now. I love artist biographies. I love reading about other artists and how they worked and how they got their ideas and their methods. But I also like to read some books on, just sort of fluffy novels, just to sort of take have my mind go in a totally different direction as well. I've got a book on my bedside, Rumi poetry as well, that I look at occasionally.
Do you think that you inherited any art or creative gene, or are you kind of like the first of the bunch?
Well, my mother was actually a professional ballerina.
Oh.
My father was an executive. And so I was fortunate that my mother understood the discipline of any of the arts. For her, it was dance, but she understood the discipline of learning any craft and to do it well. And I was also fortunate that both my parents were very supportive of me being an artist and, allowed and paid for me to go to art school. So although they weren't artists per se, they were certainly very supportive of me growing up.
Very nice. All right. Well, I want to ask you, whenever I had my first job out of college, one of my mentors said, always at the end of the interview, just say, is there anything else you want to add? And typically you get the best stuff. And I've learned that that's true. So is there anything else you want to add? What do you want the people here tonight to know?
Oh my goodness, I should have been prepared for this.
That's the hardest question, huh?
Well, people often ask me, Mary, what is it that you want people to get out of the exhibition when they see We the People? And there's a couple things that I certainly want them to have a greater appreciation of our military, our veterans, knowing that they're really all around us. And I also want our particularly young women to know that they can go out and do a project and do something of significance. And I guess, and lastly, and maybe most importantly, I want all of our veterans that go and see this exhibition to be able to look at any one of these paintings and to somehow see themselves in that painting and to say, I mattered. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Beautiful. We do want to add that the exhibition is at the Veterans Memorial Museum in Columbus, Ohio through March 21st of 2021. And the next stop is Huntsville Museum of Art in Huntsville, Alabama. That is June 27th of 2021 through September 26th of 2021. So these are all great road trips for those who are finding themselves with a lot more time these days. All right, well, I want to say thank you again so much for this time. This has been truly a great experience, and we've all learned a lot, and I feel a little more motivated tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to close and say goodnight to everyone. Big thanks for everyone for being a part of this, and especially to the Pat Conroy Literary Center for hosting this tonight. Ms. Whyte, thank you.
Thank you.